I've now been at Kairos for 2 or 3 years now. Originally started on the influencer marketing side and ended up co-founding Kairos Esports with two of the co-founders of the group now, Mike and Chris. Kairos Esports was made solely to kind of service the marketing world from a gaming esports angle. We understood like what the community needed to kind of reach them and realized there was a massive gap as far as like how to educate brands on how to access this audience. I think it's still something to this day that has not been done right, and people don't understand the difference in tone of voice and messaging that's required to kind of drive true ROI, because this audience can be toxic, they can be childish, they can be immature, and it requires a certain finesse that not everyone has. And a lot of some of the bigger agencies that we work with, whether it be media agencies or creative agencies or PR agencies, without that specific kind of understanding in this space, success, it doesn't really come very easy. So that was a couple of years ago now. Now I lead the business that kind of pushes all of our influence marketing activity, our gaming business, our esports strategy, and also some of our social. So, I think one of the biggest part of our business that's grown out recently is our social media and running some of the biggest like global brand social media pages, which again, for us is something that isn't really taken advantage of so far from a brand, even a rights holder's perspective, I think, in this space. And again, it's underrated, and the results are therefore to see from our side. And now more than ever, people are cottoning on to the benefits. Globally, we have our London office, which services our services our European business, and then our US office, which I was actually in LA when the whole COVID situation went down. We jumped on the first plane back, but Mike and I were over there to open up our LA office to kind of service our US clients a little bit better due to the time difference, and also some of the Australian, New Zealand, and even Asian clients out of that hub. So that's where we're at. It's a weird time for us because there's so much negativity in the world, and like it feels morally difficult right now because we're doing so well in the current climate. But it is still a concern for all of us, and I think like none of us know what's coming after. But for now, we're in like a real strong period of growth, and it's exciting to see where we'll be in the next year or so.
With all the traditional sports shelved for the past 2 months, basically, and looks like for the foreseeable for some of them in terms of cricket, rugby, things like that, football is kind of being forced back. What have you kind of seen as the differences working within esports in the past couple of months? Has there been just a kind of spike?
Absolutely, yeah. Spike's a great for it. I think from my side, it's more of like it's an accelerator. It's kind of sped that curve up of understanding, and almost like a forceful move for whether it be like, I think a lot of football clubs have had to wisen up very quickly to the understanding that there's no way to reach this audience now through their current channels, and they need to explore other avenues. And esports provides a perfect access to these Gen Z and millennials that previously like they were struggling to reach anyway, by the way, but prior to all of this COVID situation, but now has become the only audience that they can't reach. And from our side, I think that's like the biggest uptake we've seen, which is people looking for more of an education piece to understand like what the audience is, the size of it, yes, but also now like how to actually activate it. Because again, I think that's like the $1 million question in esports is, yes, like everyone's aware that it's massive. Everyone knows that it's growing faster than any other industry, like in the digital space, but it's like how to really leverage that for brands, clubs, in general. Personalities even are not really quite at the stage where they know what's needed to get to the next stage. And that's something that we've seen a huge amount of interest in. So people-wise, like gaming is borderless, right? Like it requires there's no barriers to entry to some extent for the most part. Games like FIFA for football clubs have proven like higher participation levels, and even in their previous activity there was nothing to do with gaming. And that's kind of now in my head sped up that process by honestly like 2 to 4 years. I think like there's a plenty of conversations I can think of where I'm speaking to 60-year-old marketing directors or commercial directors of football clubs, and they just don't get it, right? They're like, honestly, I don't know why people would watch people play games, and I don't really know why would people want to people would want to be interested in this stuff. Now they see the numbers and they see the benefits. They see the way that even the assets that they have under the football club's banner, their players, their staff, their managers getting involved. And they're like, they have no excuse, right? They have no excuse but to kind of like stand up and take note. And that's something that we benefit for in a massive, massive amount.
Do you think that then it's forced them to take it seriously in a way that they didn't before?
100%. Yes, 100%. And I have no worries like talking about that. I think we've always struggled from a legitimacy standpoint as an industry for, let's call it, the mainstream. And I think it kind of stems from the fact that, you know, esports are trying to get on mainstream television, and I don't think we need television. The whole point is that, like, the world is becoming more digital. You know, the streaming platforms are going to dwarf that of, you know, the terrestrial channels. You know, once upon a time, or the sporting channels, the Sky Sports of this world, and like we're gonna thrive, you know, regardless of mainstream media. And now I think it's because, you know, this Gen Z and millennial age group, this 16 to 35 male now isn't watching TV. They're streaming everything they can. They're using ad block. This is a very clear opportunity to diversify your offering as a football club, as a sporting club in general, and show that you can reach them in a different way. And that's, again, for us, it feels like second nature, and for a lot of the world. But I think people would be shocked at how old-fashioned some of the back end of especially some football clubs that I know. Even, like, you know, rugby clubs are quite similar, where they're struggling to get their head around it, and they need someone internally a lot at the time to, like, push it and have that agenda where, you know, it might be their kid plays games and they realize the potential of how addictive they may seem, or it's someone that just, like, spends some time on social media. But you need that advocate in-house, otherwise it's very hard to kind of sell to the seniors that don't really have a clue. People are buying into the personalities, but, like, esport organizations are building this constant brand that means that people have to keep in touch with it. And social media has meant that it's minute to minute now. And sport is still behind, right? Like, sport personalities, social media is an absolute hellhole. It's terrible. It's just PR teams running social channels. And I can guarantee that changes in the near future, because, you know, I look at, like, Mendy, for example, you know, the City left back, and he thrived on social because it's just himself, like, being a really, like, personable guy. And I think you'll see more and more of that, because it's something that esports, again, from a narrative perspective, has done far better than traditional sports.
I completely agree on that, in terms of kind of how boring footballers are on Twitter.
It's terrible, and they're not boring, right? Like, they're fun guys. Like, I see, when I'm back in the Chelsea behind the scenes, I see how playful Hazard is, and I see how playful Batshuayi is a bad example, because his social's great. But, like, I see it, and, like, there's so much opportunity, and they're not leveraging, again, assets that the clubs already have, that they could grow their overall social presence a huge amount. And they're just not really seeing the potential yet, because they're doing it old school.
I think most sports are really behind the NBA on that, because I think NBA players are the kind of, maybe in terms of the freedom they're given by the league, but certainly they are kind of the trailblazers in terms of that, when you look at Embiid and things like that.
100%. And also, like, I don't think it's a coincidence that I'd say 60% of the NBA of the NBA now currently all take part in, like, gaming tournaments on a weekly basis. I've seen maybe, like, honestly, Embiid's a great example, where he's jumped into a COD tournament in the last, like, month or so, like, 3 times, and he plays with the COD professionals all the time. Like, there's so much crossover there, and I don't think it's a coincidence that those two work so well together. And I think this is just given an excuse for these players to kind of come out of their shell and give a bit more limelight onto what is, like, the gaming esports world. Whereas previously, I think that, because there is stigma attached, and there will be stigma attached to it for a long time to come. I don't think there's any arguments there, but this does give an opportunity where we're the only thing that can thrive as esports, that people don't have a choice but to engage and but to have fun with it, because no one's complaining.
Do you think that this time is now giving it the chance to build a foundation with maybe some kind of older people, maybe even people into their kind of late 20s as well?
Yeah, it's a tough one, because I think the misconception that, like, esports, like, skews super young is also just, like, just incorrect. Like, from our side, you know, as any young industry, it ages up year on year by definition with the more that people come in. I think on that point, absolutely, the more people that are exposed to it, you know, above the age of 25, means that average age will skew even faster older. But, you know, the average age of an esports gamer is 24, 25 now. We're not talking about 16-year-old kids sitting in their basement, you know, like, you know, spotty and eating bags of chips, right, on American TV. You know, it's very much a case of, it is mature. In fact, esports is more mature than the wider gaming audience. You know, as a specific niche or a specific part of gaming, esports skews more mature across the board. And so, in that sense, it's actually quite attractive for brands to come into, because you can guarantee you're going to hit, you know, an 18+ audience, for example. It's why you see so many gambling brands come into esports, because you can actually age gate things very, very strongly, whether it's through the pro players themselves or age gating content in general. When the industry is skewing an average age of 24+, you know that you're going to hit, you know, a pretty good coverage, and from a guidelines and regulations perspective, you're covered. So yeah, in that sense, like, there is, and also that's game to game, right? Like, I look at Fortnite, for example, and everyone's aware of how young that can skew. Again, that will age up over time, but, you know, if you're looking for, like, a Counter-Strike audience, for example, it skews super heavy towards, like, those mid-20s, and that's something that I think is something, again, that we have to educate quite heavily a lot of the time, because they are the 60-year-olds that see their 12-year-old son playing Fortnite and consuming esports content or gaming content in general, if they're their favorite content creator, and they'll be like, well, it's all kids playing this, and they're getting affected badly when actually like it's aging up like by the day.
Do you anticipate that this period will now get more brands maybe transferring some of their sponsorship funds that they might have stored up from traditional sports to esports, or just investing more in esports? And do you think that that is something that's sustainable and then is going to continue increasing?
It's a tough one. Like the answer to the first point is that like absolutely yes, right? Like that, again, to my earlier point, they don't have a choice but to invest elsewhere. Like they've had their marketing channels literally completely shut down. If they want to go and invest in out of home when there's no one out of home, then that's absolutely fine. But anyone with a brain, you know, will look to put it into more digital focused marketing. I think that there's two sides of the coin. One, budgets are being frozen a lot, to be fair, and I think from my side, it's just like kind of a contingency plan to slow down on spend, regardless of how well their digital ad spend is going. So in that sense, it's not all like, you know, like fine and dandy, but the ones that are spending, I think a lot of it is like test budgets, and that's the best and worst thing. I think testing the water in gaming and esports in general is the best and worst thing that a brand can do. It gives them a flavor of what they can expect, which I think for the most part is always positive. However, gaming esports doesn't work on from an authenticity standpoint. It needs something longer term, and you need to prove that you're in it for the right reasons and you're in it for the long run, and you want to add value to the audience's experiences. And in that sense, I think that, you know, dipping your toes in the water may not get you the results that you ultimately desire. And that worries me because, you know, if those results aren't good for a small scale campaign, they're never going to come back for something more comprehensive. And I think that's the struggle that we have on a consistent basis, is educating a brand to understand that, yes, we can run something small scale and the results will be cool and the sentiment will be great and you'll drive, you know, whether it be sales or revenue or acquisition, that's fine. But how do we make this into something longer term that will prove like far more valuable down the line, that will put you front of mind for any consumers, whether it be now or in 5 or 10 years? It's the reason that you see car brands getting into it so much now, right? Like Mercedes of the world, they're not coming in to sell cars to 18-year-olds or like a C-class to an 18-year-old. They're coming to the 18-year-olds that in 6 years, when they look to buy their first luxury car or their first nicer car, the only place they're going to go is Mercedes, because they've supported their passion from 6-7 years ago. So from a budget perspective, yes, it will increase now, and yes, it is increasing, and we're seeing a higher demand, and that's exciting. I'm worried, and I hope that they get the ROI that they need, because, you know, they're not all coming to us, so they won't all get the best results. But from our side, I think it is important that, you know, they get treated right and they get educated in the right way, and they have realistic expectations, right? You are not going to drive a huge, you're not going to make a 600% ROI on sales if you do a 20 grand test, for example. And that's something that, again, we're very happy to be upfront about, because some people expect it and it's just not the way that it works. Down the line, it will be interesting to judge, because I don't think it's something that anyone has the answer to. I hope and I believe that it will scale and the budgets will increase once they see the benefits, but I think it's also how they get treated, and not everyone's going to have a positive experience, and that's on us to kind of work out how we vet that journey.
So what would you kind of say is the kind of next trend, or the next step that you see is coming in that space, in terms of, is it that needing that longevity from brands, that commitment?
Yeah, it's a tough one, because it's also rich for me to come in and say to like a brand, like, you know, you need to come in there and you need to sign off for 12 months off the bat, right? That's just like, this not how anything works, really. So in that sense, I understand. I think from a trends perspective, I think there still needs to be a massive amount of education around how we activate. And I think from a traditional sports background, sponsorship has traditionally been, I'd say, fairly top level. You know, I look at Carabao, for example, the Chelsea training kit sponsor and training ground sponsor as well. And, you know, their activations are fairly limited. They're not particularly creative, and I don't feel they really build a connection between audience and brand. In esports, that doesn't cut it. You need to provide something that's far more beneficial to the consumer, because they're more untrusting, they're more clued up, they can research everything on the internet, they know everything you've ever done, good or bad. They are very, very savvy to everything that you've ever done as a brand. And in that sense, you need to prove that you are even more authentic than you would in traditional sports. So I think there can be a lot of brands that have come from a traditional sports sponsorship background and kind of look to badge slap, you know, in esports and get some really, really bad results, because I don't know what they're expecting. You know, they're not building a community, they're not building any messaging, no brand sentiment. They're purely just coming in to put their badge in front of people, and that's never going to result in anything positive. So from our side, it's very much like data led. I think data is going to be be a massive part, and there's already a lot of third-party agencies trying to showcase what media value can look like in esports. And I think that's something that we'll continue to see more. I think from a creativity standpoint, there'll be a massive uptake in the creative activations of brands, and you see it now and again. Like, it's something that we pride ourselves on, but we're a fraction of the bigger picture. And I think for me, it's a case of how do we make sure that everyone, as much as possible, is producing like best-in-class activations as a way to decrease that gap from brand to consumer and audience in the case of esports. And that's something that I think will be the continual struggle for the next like 2 to 3 years, maybe even longer, to be fair, considering how long it took traditional sports to see activation as the main part of what a sponsorship should look like.
Do you think that data is kind of easier in esports because of, in terms of things like Twitch, and obviously you've got those streaming numbers right there?
Yeah, it's an amazing question, and for me, it's something that I feel so passionate about, because in my head, as blunt as it may sound, I don't think there's anything in the world that can track results such as like esports or gaming. The reason is it's completely digital, and for us that means you can track literally everything that you do, whether it be consuming content on a screen that we can track better than you could on a TV, or whether it be on social media using trackable links to make sure that we know every single conversion that we've driven from every single individual personality or team. I don't think there's anything that's as trackable as what we're doing now in the digital space. And in that sense, I think, again, it proves our worth far quicker than maybe a traditional sports would. And it's something that's super exciting for us. And again, data is key to success anyway, because there's a lot of naysayers out there, and there's a lot of people that not disbelievers, which is totally fair. And data is something that you can't argue with. And we'll see a huge amount of, again, like further interest from the fact that you come back with these case studies and they have genuine, tangible results that dwarf that they've had in other verticals, whether not necessarily even sport, but, lifestyle or even like out of home. Like I get baffled every time I see an advert on the underground, because I'm just like, you have literally no way to understand how you're going to see any results or track this. Someone's going to tell you they've driven X amount of eyeballs, which you can't quantify by any means anyway, let alone if they're engaged with it. And like, I don't know what you have to show for it. Whereas like we can show, direct conversions, click-through rates, sales, revenue off the back of specific campaigns. And again, even from an influencer marketing standpoint, all the way through to an esports standpoint, the digital age, I think, like will benefit off that a huge amount. I liken it to social media like 10 years ago, when social media, everyone thought was like a trend, and like it was going to die off in a bit, and no one really saw the benefits. They went back to spending on radio, and now, budgets are majority social and digital for the most, for the global brands. And I think we're in a similar position where, it's never going to be a quick process. In some ways, like in a good quote unquote way, COVID has sped that up by a huge amount, but it's still by no means like a quick win or a quick fix. And this is something that needs to develop, and the industry needs to mature a huge amount in the next 5 to 10 years to get to the position where we're at. It's still young, it's still in its infancy. There's still a lot of unknowns as far to like prove value, and that's not going to come anytime soon for sure.